What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Prison to Promise podcast, where we explore the voices and stories driving meaningful change in the criminal legal system. I'm your host, Dr. Craig Waleed, and today I have the privilege of speaking with Andy Potter, a man who's dedicated his life to performing corrections from the inside out. As a former corrections officer, one of the founders of One Voice United, Andy brings a critical perspective on how the system can work better for both staff and incarcerated people. Andy understands firsthand the immense challenges within our nation's prisons, understaffing, safety concerns, and a culture that too often prioritizes punishment over rehabilitation. Through his advocacy, Andy is working to shift the narrative, pushing for policies supporting corrections officers while fostering a more humane and effective correctional system. In this conversation, we'll dive into the pressing issues facing prisons today, the role of education and training in shaping a safer environment, and the controversial use of solitary confinement. Andy will also share his thoughts on bridging the gap between corrections officers and broader criminal justice reform efforts. If you want to understand how systemic change happens in real time and what it takes to reform a deeply entrenched system, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Here's my conversation with the good man, Andy Potter, on the Prison to Promise podcast. Now let's go. Andy, what's up, man?
How you doing?
Good, brother. How are you?
I'm doing well. Are we gonna go on camera or are we gonna be off camera?
We could be on camera or off, whatever works for you.
I'm okay doing either one.
Okay, well, let's get on camera.
I like seeing your face.
Yeah, I like seeing yours as well, man. You got a wonderful smile, brother. Hey, man, out of respect for your time, I wanted to jump right into what we're doing here, which is, Prison to Promise podcast. And what I do is I collect stories of people who are involved with the carceral system on either side as a means of trying to encourage people and motivate people to do better for themselves. And so that's why I asked you to be here. So again, thank you for being here with me, man.
Absolutely. It's an honor. I really appreciate it, and I have a lot of respect for your work and for you, just as an individual. You've always been very top flight with me, and if anything I can do to help, I'm always willing.
Right on, right on. I thank you so much, Andy, and that makes me feel very humble, a little warm, and flattering. Right off the muscle, man. Like my first question is, if you could tell folks just a little bit about your background and what inspired you to create the One Voice United, because I know you're known for One Voice United.
Yeah, so I'll just jump right into it. I started in corrections in 1989. I grew up in a very small town, and it was a very broken town. It was in the 80s, and a lot of my friends and people I grew up with, along with myself, we didn't see a higher education as a pathway for us. I had a single mom. She was raising 4 of us kids. So a higher education just didn't seem like it was part of my future. I grew up pretty rough. I was in and out of jail a lot of times growing up. And the options that I saw really were the military, maybe trying to find a factory job someplace, and the prison system. It was, for me, I was limited. So I looked at the prison systems only because in a lot of places where I grew up, the factories closed and they opened a prison. It was rural Michigan, and those jobs were booming. And it was good income, good health care, a pension. It was a way into the middle class for me. So I took the job and I worked well over 2 decades as a correctional officer, and I worked my way up. My peers elected me to run the union. Ultimately, I worked my way up. I was the executive director of Michigan Corrections Organization, which I led for years. That's how I got into the system. That's how I worked in the system, and I worked in a few different levels: maximum security and a medium security.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. And you've shared your story with me before, I think while we were strolling the streets of Germany at some point, and when we were in Colorado. So I'm familiar with your story. And what always stands out to me, and sometimes I use snippets of your story when I'm talking to people, is how both of our backgrounds are very similar. And the backgrounds of many people who work in prisons, as well as those people who are living in prisons, have very similar backgrounds. Though some come from rural areas, many of the people that work there and the people who live there come from urban areas, but their communities tend to be marginalized nonetheless, and they have very few options, So just interesting, man, how that works out.
Yeah, a lot of my people I grew up with, people I looked up to, I went to prison. They ended up in prison, and I saw them when I was in prison. And
Yeah.
we'll get into this, but that dynamic of people you knew on the streets, when you get
Hmm.
into prison, the prison system is not designed for you to still be in communication the same way you would otherwise. So the people I
Hmm.
looked up to, I had to basically tell them, we can't communicate the way we did. And they'd have to leave. Instead of me being able to mentor or in return be a good example for them. Now, that wasn't allowed. That's over familiarization, and you could be
Hmm.
fired for it. So we can get into a little bit of that in the system design later. But yeah, a lot of people I grew up with ended up in prison.
Yeah, and it's interesting, man. So, we know that, prison causes these rifts, these family separations, these friend separations, this us versus them. And, that's totally contrary or contrasting what we witnessed when we were in Europe. They showed, it wasn't an us versus them, it was us and them working together to make better neighbors. And I think that's a big contrast between prison systems here in the state versus those prison systems that we witnessed over in where were we in Norway and Germany, you know.
Yeah, for real. Honestly, if we're going to be real about it, the society is much different.
Yeah,
Society in some Scandinavian countries, places you and I visited, are based on humanity.
yeah,
They're based on dignity and
yeah.
showing each other that humanity. In America, our society is just different. We believe when we incarcerate someone, it's to punish them every single day, right?
Hmm.
That's the narrative. That's the way people are. You turn on any TV program, 4 or 5 channels will be lockup, because people are fascinated in America with law enforcement and with corrections for the wrong reasons. They want to see the
Yeah,
shield, they want to see the gas, somebody being dragged. That is the way we view it.
mm,
Uh, and it's for the wrong reasons that they're interested.
yeah.
So, you know,
I'm thinking it's the violent nature of our country. Our country was founded through violence, and it's been maintained through violence and force. So I think that some of our country's favorite pastimes have always been violence, even like our sports,
yeah,
like football. How violent is football? Hockey, MMA, if
totally.
it ain't, and so if it ain't, crash bang, then, it loses people's attention. But, you said something, Andy, that really sent me in a different direction, I guess, or just made me think about like you mentioned the importance of dignity and respect and humanity, like some of these other European countries have versus what our country has. And then, going back to what I mentioned earlier about you creating One Voice United. And so I'm wondering, like, based on, I guess, the angle of humanity, dignity, etc. How does One Voice United advocate for both the COs or correction officers and incarcerated individuals to exist or coexist in this state of respect and dignity?
Let me go back for a second, Craig, because I want to just tell you a little bit about why I created One Voice United. And it's really a team of us that founded it. And the reason is, through all my time working in the Department of Corrections, and I was proud of some of the work I did. And I'm also proud of or not proud about some of the stuff that took place. I've said this a number of times. My hands aren't clean in this system. Like there's a perpetuation of things, and you're trained to just follow orders and not be creative and not be innovative and don't try to mentor. All the lights go out of your eyes from the time you're in the academy to the time you walk through the front gates, because you realize the system was never designed for success for anybody, those who work there or those who are incarcerated. And so in around 2016 and 2015 and 16, there was a riot over the food in Michigan, where I had officers and other people taking pictures of the food because it was so subpar. There was maggots in it. There was things. It was horrible. And they took a moral position on it, and they said it's just wrong. You cannot feed this kind of food to people. And also they were eating it. So here it is, a place where I was starting to see this, where some scales were removed from my eyes, where I saw us inextricably linked. Those who worked there and those who were incarcerated. Those who worked there are in the same conditions as those who lived there. And we were eating the same food, and it was immoral. So they risked their jobs by taking those pictures and sending them to me. And we fought, and we ended up getting that changed. But there was a riot, and not one officer was hurt, not physically. Mentally, of course they were. And of course it was scary as hell. But all those officers I interviewed said, you got to take this and you got to move this on a national level and have this conversation that we were told many times over, none of you are going to be harmed because you advocated for us. And most of that was over the food. Now, I'm not saying that was a great way to get at it, or that's never a good a good scenario playing out. But it did show me there's these places where we are inextricably linked. So I created One Voice United so that I saw the landscape changing, and those voices of correctional staff, not just the officers, but all of them, were not involved. I heard of, there was media pundits, there was academia, there was formerly incarcerated reform leaders, there was politicians all speaking out about corrections reform. I couldn't find one place where they were talking to some of the true consultants, and that is those that are closest to the problem. Outside of those incarcerated are those people that work there. We're the second largest stakeholder, and no one was asking us, how do we fix this broken system that harms you as much as it harms anybody else? The PTSD rate is extremely high for a correctional officer. The average lifespan is 59 years old. That's 16 years less than anybody else in any other profession. 38% higher PTSD rate than any other profession. It's the same PTSD rate as someone that is in active military duty every day of their life. Think about the impact that has. Yeah. So I created One Voice United because I knew I couldn't get at these issues on a state level because they didn't just belong to my state. These were national issues that we were facing in this system. And I needed to build a platform to get national voices involved in a national conversation about how do we really change this system for real. Not just check a box, but how do we involve all these stakeholders, and how do I bring those most unlikely stakeholders together to cross those lines of differences to be able to, do you know how powerful that is? And that's why I created One Voice United, was to be able to do that in a way that was much more systematically on a national level, instead of us being siloed in our states trying to solve these problems. You won't solve. It's a system that's too big, too powerful, too expensive, too political, right? So that's why I created it. And I can go on and on about the places that were inextricably linked, like overcrowding and understaffing. Now, nobody feels safe in that kind of environment. Look at New York. It's a great example right now where desperation has taken over, right? And I know I'm rambling here, Craig.
It's okay. Keep on, man. Go.
Yeah, I just think that the system itself, right, unless we're going to go after the design unless we're going to really look at the system in the places you and I have been and really reimagine what it can look like while we're maintaining what we have in a dignified and humane way. Like, it's great to look at other systems like Norway and Germany and think about how do we duplicate some of those programs where they fit and where they work.
You can see what's possible.
Yeah, but we got to maintain what we have while we're doing that.
Right.
And still, you know, show that dignity and that humanity to both who work there and those who are incarcerated, because otherwise it perpetuates the us versus them. And this system is riddled with that.
It sure is, man. And you know, it's interesting as you were talking, you threw your hands up like this, and you were saying something about how it's siloed. And I just looked at your fingers, and I'm thinking, you know, when our fingers are separated one by themselves, they don't do as much as like when they're united in a fist, you know, or then when they're working in cohesion, they can get a whole lot more done than just singularly, you know. So just a great visual as I'm thinking about what you're talking about. But also, I was thinking, you know, as you mentioned that, how when people who are working in prisons have safer, more secure environments, that makes the environment for people who are living there also more safe and secure. And so, therefore, both groups of people, be it the security staff and the people who are living there, they won't have as many, I guess, health disparities or health challenges, you know, the psychological health challenges, the shortened lifespans, the chronic diseases that come up. And the interesting thing is that both COs and incarcerated people have very similar health outcomes, you know, and they're not bright. They're not bright at all.
No, they're not. You know, I have a program that I share with Just Leadership. And some of the stuff I'll get into that. But the things that I've learned along with you, you know, we're a little privileged in this, that we've been exposed to those other designs, those other countries, you know, people that have taken us on these journeys, like Jesse and Arthur Reiser through Arrow Center for Justice, right? We were blessed by that. And I've been blessed by the Vera Institute and others who have taken us on this journey to really understand the system differently than those that haven't had those opportunities. So that takes me to a place where I have what's called Barriers to Bridges. It's a program that One Voice United is teamed up with Just Leadership USA, where we bring together formerly incarcerated leaders with union leaders and frontline staff to really peel back those layers. We do it in an undisclosed location. We do it without scrutiny. You can talk about what we work on, can't talk about who's there, because people have to maintain, right? And it's risky because nobody wants those stakeholders to come together and really peel back these layers of harm, these layers of racism, these layers of institutional racism, the things you can peel back about the system and its roots, right, will allow you to start imagining, how do we now come together, and what could it look like? What could it be? You talk about like segregation or places of confinement where there's the most disagreement in the United States in some ways, right? When it comes to solitary confinement and other places. And when these two stakeholders can come together, they can inform a policy much better than if it's just dropped in by some consultant or somebody that's never done the work, who has never been incarcerated, does not know what that's like, right? So when these folks come together, you want to talk about a powerful combination and understanding. So I do this exercise where we separate the groups, then, and we talk about what has the system given you and what has it taken from you? And we come back together, and then we go through this list. And I'm going to tell you something, Craig. You want to talk about something profound. When those things align perfectly,
I'm thinking that's powerful. I could see it in my head. Wow.
When we're both looking at each other saying, damn, you went through the same thing. You had a divorce, so did he. You went through the same trauma, he did too. right? We're seeing and feeling the same exact. It's because the conditions people live in are the same conditions that they work in this system. And it's designed to keep us from working together. By its very design, it's a paramilitary structure. I'll be fired if I spend too much time. And he may be stabbed or rode out or something like that if he spends too much time talking to me about what makes us better men. You know what I mean? Anyways. So
That's interesting though, man, because as you're talking about that, even this last piece you're mentioning about, how people could get fired or stabbed, it makes me think about when I was incarcerated back in the 90s. And there were a few COs, man, who I talked to, but we couldn't talk much. It was clear that we had a connection and we enjoyed talking. But I didn't want to get stabbed or beat over the head. And same with him. He didn't want to get fired, because of over familiarity. But we were learning from each other in these little snippets when we talked. And so it's very powerful. But I think the only difference really, man, is just that we have on uniforms, green uniforms and blue uniforms, gray uniforms and orange uniforms, whatever that is. But we're people. We all have the same needs and we're impacted the same way by these systems that we're exposed to, man. Very
yeah,
powerful, man.
it really does reveal where the humanity should be. When we're looking across from each other and we're feeling the same traumas. Now that's you can have a visual in your mind about how people connect. And when we leave this thing, this has built profound friendships. This has built deep friendships where people are now working together for around solutions. Like we have stuff that we're going to be unveiling here soon. We have a video that we'll be unveiling and things like that. So hopefully you can stay in contact with me and I can share some of this stuff. There's something that goes into having a right to feel safe. I've worked with Dr. Nanika Jones Tapia. I don't know if you know her. She's with Chicago Beyond, and they've created something called holistic safety. It's an approach. It's different. It's like they publish something that's called Do I Have a Right to Feel Safe? Right. And it's a pretty powerful guide, right, to how you can make transformational change. But the key thing is these stakeholders, they all have to feel safe. They all have to feel like somebody has their best interest in mind. And we fail so often in this system in many places. And the biggest problem we face right now is the staffing levels. That's the biggest problem criminal justice faces right now. Put everything else aside, the staffing crisis that we're in right now creates an atmosphere of fear like I've never seen it in my entire career. Like if you look at New York, like they're faced with what do? Go in every day in these kinds of conditions, or do we do, an unsanctioned strike? Now that's unheard of, Craig, for folks to do this and resort to that, but they are against the wall. And the commissioners and the directors, they inherited this in most cases. They didn't make it. No, they didn't make the situation. They've got good intentions, but they're not always as informed as they could be because they're not bringing in the right stakeholders, the true consultants, right? And so that's the biggest thing we face right now is that staffing. Who wants to come to work in this kind of environment, right? When it doesn't provide you the same things it provided me when I was growing up, right away into the middle class and healthcare. And if you're taking all of that away,
nobody's coming.
Nobody's coming. And the next generation, you and I both know, right? The generation coming up right now, the workforce coming up right now, they want flexibility. They want things that you and I never thought about, really.
That's right. That's right. A lot of them are working remotely and they're working on the beach. They're not thinking about coming into a factory or coming to a prison, But you said something too, Andy, that's really pertinent, and that is the need for safety. And that's not just at work. That's, throughout one's life. People want to feel safe. When people don't feel safe in whatever station in life they're in, they tend to unravel. And I'm thinking about, the prevalence of mental health disorders, substance abuse disorders, and things of that nature that sometimes plague people who are incarcerated, plague people who are working in these places. And so, like, what kind of strategies would you recommend, man, for addressing such things? Feeling unsafe and helping people work through their mental health and personal challenges in prisons.
I already mentioned the holistic safety approach. That's one approach. But when you talk about someone's feeling safe and their mental health, right? That's a big point here because when you look at the levels of PTSD and things like that, that's real for everybody that's involved in this, right? So I think a good wellness, a holistic wellness approach
Mhm.
is very important. I think when you have training's super important. When people come into this system, they shouldn't just be trained on how to apply restraints and being trained on the rules and regulations and policies and how do you listen. When I first hired in, the very first thing I was taught was you don't trust anybody. You don't trust nobody, not your partner, nobody, right? So, and you spend more time in training, learning how to, it's tactical, it's not emotional. So we don't get any kind of emotional training whatsoever, right? So the dynamic security we have seen in Norway, for instance, that doesn't exist. That socialization, how you have a social conversation. People say, oh, they want you to be social workers. No, they miss the point. It's about socializing. It's about normalizing. It's about having did you see the game last night? Did you, just having that normal conversation and interaction. I think those kinds of things, it's a 21st century kind of thinking. And it has to be well funded. They're struggling in Norway and places like that right now that we use as examples. Like I'm in close communication with all of these countries. I have a number of them that I work very closely with that are saying we're starting to look more like the US than we are our old self, right? So
Yeah, I heard that from our people over in Norway. I helped them with a paper writing just about that, how they're starting to look more like us. They're struggling with that normalization, that socialization. They're
yeah,
becoming more security focused.
yeah, and that's because it's cheaper, Craig.
Yeah.
Right. And so, there has to be an attention paid to that part of it because, again, people are saying, don't put money into criminal justice, put it into the schools, into the communities. Yeah. And if we're a great America like we say we are, we should do both.
I was
Right.
thinking the same thing.
You got to do both.
Yeah.
That's why you're right back where we are. You're robbing
Right.
to pay Paul, and we don't have to do that.
Right. Invest in both because most people are coming back to the community who are incarcerated, and the people who are working there are coming back to the community every day. So we need these people to be more healthy
Yeah,
so
and
that they
don't
can add on to
incarcerate
the
so
community.
many. You don't have to
Oh, yeah.
incarcerate so many people. We
Yeah. Yeah.
incarcerate more people. Listen, in our incarceral system, in our entire incarceral system, there's as many people in that system as is in the entire population of Norway. Think about that.
About 7 million.
It's a little more.
Tourists.
Yeah, it's about
Wow.
7 million, and it affects another 10 when you're talking about their families and how that's
Mm.
disruptive of
Hmm.
those who work there and those who are incarcerated, right? So the effect
Yeah.
is so far reaching and it just replays the same narrative,
Yeah.
right? The same
Decade
narrative.
after.
Yeah. And so to break that, right, people have to really be willing to peel back those layers and do some
Hmm.
of the work that we're doing with One Voice United. They have to be willing to step into this with their whole self.
And peeling back those layers, man, it can be painful. It can really be
Yeah.
painful and disturbing. You know, but I'm also thinking about there might need to be like some sort of policies in place too, to maybe support that work that people like you and your organization are doing. Without, some legal backing, some political policies behind it, it just becomes work, but there's no real backbone to it,
You're
so to
so
speak.
true. That is, you nailed it as you usually do, Craig. You just nailed it. And it's policy. We can do a lot of work, and we do a lot of work all over the country with all kinds of stakeholders crossing those lines of differences. But unless
Hmm.
that leads to some policy change, some real
Yes.
policy change, then it's just us doing some incremental work on a national level. And it has
Hmm.
to lead to something bigger. And that means everybody's got to get their pride and set it aside. Everybody's got to get their ego and set it aside. And everybody's got to come together and stop pointing fingers and start working together. You know, it's unprecedented, the work that we're doing with Barriers to Bridges. Like the work that we do there and the work that's going to come out of that to form policy and to help inform policy is going to be the most informed that it's been. And I don't even know how long, to be honest with you, but now we have the pendulum swing where more people are being incarcerated again, right? And we need to take a look at why that is. Why do we incarcerate exactly? We should look at all these things, right?
Yeah.
And then how is somebody going home? Like we can't just drop them off without those programs and stuff continuing.
Right.
And you got to have professional staff that are willing to get into this work for the right reason and change that narrative about what a good corrections staff person do and change that into something much more humanizing.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's a big ask, but it's a big need as well. And it can be filled. But, you know, I shouldn't say but, I should say and. What I'm saying is the need for professionalizing the field for correction officers so they could get better training other than just tactical training. They need to understand the importance of socializing. And then that big piece that you really dropped about, you know, the continuity of care, providing quality care while people are inside, and then having a bridge for them to continue that care when they're outside. And then, you know, you also talked about decarceration, you know, not incarcerating as many people. And one of the things that stands out to me when we think about who's incarcerated, there is a large number of people who are incarcerated who have psychological disorders, who come from poverty, who are coming from just marginalized communities. So it seems like marginalization has been criminalized. So we have to, I think, rethink what is criminal and what isn't, you know, because I think people would do a lot better if they had treatment, if they had opportunity, if they had access to treatment and opportunity, you know, training, etc.
It's totally true. Look,
Yeah,
you have so many people incarcerated, right, that are not mentally well. And you have people working that are not trained to understand or to deal with it. They're trained to recognize it. They're trained to, but do you really want to put those people in a confined space where it's only going to worsen? Like it doesn't make sense. It just really doesn't. And they're very challenging. And it's really challenging for somebody that works there that's not really equipped to be able to handle that kind of person, right? Those people need a different kind of help. And you're just not. Look, I'm going to tell you right now, there's people that need to be confined. There are people that do need to be in prison. I've done this too many years to try to paint this picture to say everybody should just go home. Not everybody
and that's
can.
not the
Everybody
case.
should.
Yeah.
Right.
But they still should be treated humanely.
That's right. So, but what's left, right? We should equip those that are working there to handle that population. And we should also show that population that dignity that they deserve as well while they're incarcerated. I just, you know, I know people are like, well, they're never going home. Why are you going to give them vocational training? Why? Because it gives them something so they feel humanized.
Quality of life, man.
It is. And it helps those who work there because they're safer. People are less, you know, the violence and the tension all goes up when people are locked down. And that's what we have right now in the United States is there's a crisis where those programs and those things are getting shelved because there isn't enough staff to keep that institution safe and running.
Yeah. So we gotta think about or rethink how prisons and jails are being operated and staffed and populated. But Andy, we're coming up near the end of our time together, man. And I wanted to ask you just a couple questions that are more, I guess, focused. But I really enjoy our conversation. Every time I see you, I haven't seen you a whole lot, but whenever we spend time together, I've always enjoyed our conversations. Thank you, man. But what I'm thinking about is like, if somebody wanted to get into the field of corrections, what advice would you give?
The advice that I have is really, it's difficult because right now, as is, you're asking somebody to come into a situation that you know is broken. If you're talking to somebody coming into this profession is broken. So it's very difficult for me to say it's a great idea. I would say, though, that number one, have your family with you on board with this, and make sure your mental state and your health and mental health and physical health is in great shape, and go into it for the right reason. Right? Don't go into this for any other reason other than you think you can make some differences, and go into this and always keep your mind open to explore new ideas, new ways of doing it, and keep that line of communication as open as you possibly can. It's a really hard question, Craig. What advice would I give someone? Because, I could very well say, run the other way as fast as you possibly can. But that's not going to solve our problem. We need another generation to come into this that are willing to do something different. And they want to. That's the thing, is I hear so many people say, I just want to make a difference. If I could just make a difference in one person's life. But the system is still not designed for that. So that's the best I can give you right now, man. I wish I could.
Your best is all I want. Your best is all I want. Yeah, and that's great, though. That's great advice, man. And in closing, man, like within our last minute here, two things. And one is like, what legacy would you hope to leave? And lastly, how can people get in touch?
My legacy really is to help people go home feeling like there's some success in whatever their time is that they work there, whatever their time is when they're incarcerated. I want them all to go home safe, number one, and I want them all to go home thinking there's a possibility where I have options, different options that brought me here. I want those that go to work to go home and be able to talk about their day with some pride, and to be able to talk about the success they shared with somebody going home. I just want a system that's healthier, more humane, and more dignified for everyone. That's the hopes, man. And I would say if someone wants to get in touch with my organization, just go to www.onevoiceunited.org. You can see the programs that we work on. You can see our upcoming events. We have an Elevating Our Profession conference that's coming up in May in Boston. Give you the best insight of what we do. There's videos there on wellness. I'm Not Okay. There's other videos, Blue Ribbon Commission video. People should just check this stuff out, Craig, and they'll really understand the direction we're going in. And I'm always willing to have someone push back on me too, man, and to teach me something and to tell me something about the system that I'm missing, because we all have blind spots.
Absolutely, Andy. Absolutely. The willingness to listen, learn, and challenge perspectives is what drives real change. These conversations push us all to see beyond our own experiences and work towards a more just system. And with that, thanks for sharing your insights and your time with us today. Your work and your perspectives are invaluable to this movement. And to our listeners, stay engaged, stay informed, and keep pushing for justice. Until the next time, this is the Prison to Promise podcast. Take care. If you or someone you know is interested in being a guest on the Prison to Promise podcast, please hit me up at Dr. Craig Waleed at gmail.com. I'll spell it for you. That's DrCraigWaleed. That's two E's as in Edward and one D as in David. Dr. Craig Waleed gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.